This is For the Culture.
All right, everybody, welcome back to For the Culture. It's Dr. C.I. and I am in the building. I'm going to get right to it. For those of y'all who are having things on your mind about what's currently going on in the world with the mass shootings, white supremacy, racism, and all the shit that's going on in the world, right? So, or I should say, particularly in the United States. Now, first, I want to talk about the recent mass shootings. First, the one in Atlanta, Georgia, where a white gunman walked into 3 different Asian spas and killed people because it was a hate crime. It is a hate crime, y'all. If you've seen the media, you've seen how police have said, oh, he was having a bad day. Well, you know what? I've had bad days. I've had days where I've lost family members and people I love to injustice because of racism and systemic racism. I have been on days where I didn't have any money and I was starving. There have been days where I have been physically attacked, even when I was in college on campus by a white male, right? I run a business. There are days when I get 10 to 15 rejections in my email and maybe 1 acceptance because it's the sales funnel. I have terrible fucking days. I work in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I deal with things on a daily basis that most people don't. You know what I do? I meditate. I go for a walk. I journal, right? I do all the things that work for me that don't involve me murdering people based on race and gender in particular. But what pisses me off even more is the fact that a sheriff stood on the platform at a press conference and said, this man was having a bad day. No, he's a fucking terrorist. He murdered innocent people, right? Because of their identities. Because of maybe he did have mental health issues. But let me be clear. Racism is very mental. And that is an issue, especially for people who believe that their race is supreme. So, if his mental health was focused around racism, a side effect of mental health is not often racism, right? So it was unjust. Now, the reason I'm pointing this out is because historically, over years and years, the media, especially the mainstream media, has always had a way of framing victims by white people as mistakes, as a series of bad events like Lemony Snicket's. But it doesn't grant BIPOC, which is Black and Indigenous people of color, and other people the same grace if and when they commit crimes, even crimes of lesser value, right? Y'all talk worse about a Black person who steals a car. For example, if we go to a newspaper article and look it up, you talking about all the bad things that this Black person has done throughout their criminal history or things that they've done in their life. You immediately plague them as a bad person with issues. But when white people commit a crime, y'all want to humanize them. And here's the thing. We tend to make excuses for people who we share identities with. Right? Even family and the people that we love. Sometimes we make excuses for bad shit that they do. But the reason this excuse is laced in systemic racism is because it is a much broader systemic issue that includes the mass media, that includes the Justice Department, right? It is all of those things working together to perpetuate racial systemic oppression. And so I am saying that this is a form of institutionalized racism. And not only is the hate crime a form of institutionalized racism, so is the way that you all talk about it. So what can we do differently? What you could start to do is 2 things. You could either treat white offenders like you treat BIPOC offenders, or you can treat BIPOC offenders like you treat white offenders. Right? Either way it goes, it's the same damn outcome. Humanize those who do wrong across the board, but also punish them for their consequence, right? But there's a much broader issue, because if we're going to be talking about issues of mental health in general, especially in BIPOC communities where people have less access to quality health resources or social service resources who do offer those things are extremely overwhelmed because they're underfunded, this is a problem. Now, where does this problem emit from? Where is it created? Well, let's look historically at a few different things where, in particular, white supremacy has felt like it has lost power and has massacred different populations across the United States. Y'all take a second, check out some of these clips. Are you starting to get the hint? There's this book by this man that's called The Courage to Be. It's by Paul Tillich. And it talks about the fear of anxiety and how people act irrationally when they feel like they're losing power. Well, let me be clear that the demographic, especially racially, of the world is changing. It's changing in our professional services. It's changing in politics. It's changing in our businesses. It's changing all over the world, all over, right? And the people who want to remain in power, who are used to having power and privilege, want to keep it the way that they earn access to power and privilege. And if they can't, they start to target vulnerable populations. And most of that has happened throughout our history because of murder. If you look at, for example, at like the Tulsa riots and how they beat, killed, bruised, raped, and battered Black populations over time because of the fear of losing power. You see, it's not, you look at someone's identity, now immediately fear causes us to act irrationally. So if I'm a white person and I'm on a ship and I pull up to a continent where I see people who don't look like me, who practice different things than I do, then slowly but surely I find a justification to get rid of them so I can gain power or remain in power. Has that happened historically? Yes. Does that continue to happen? Yes. Do we have shitty rules in politics that perpetuate that? Yes. But if you look at the face of politics, even that is slowly but surely starting to change. States that were once red are now blue. Congress people, the identity of them is starting to change. And even though it's happening in small numbers, it still alerts those who are in power. And so we need to be mindful of the fact that we got to show up for our communities. So I get it. We got to vote, right? We got to vote people out of office. We got to go to town halls and things where people talk about laws. We got to work with politicians to create more equitable laws. And we got to create our own institutions to really make sure that we have governing bodies who are in the best, who serve at the best interest of the people that they advocate for. And some of that's happening, but it's just unfortunate about the way that the series of events are coming to light. Now, this is unfortunate for me to say, but I'm not surprised. I'm just always disappointed, hurt, and a little fearful of what's to come when people realize the misconception of power and what it is that you think that you control, and take action to harm the people that you think are taking it away from you. That is part of systemic racism. You've built these institutions, you've built these policies, and you've built these laws and these practices that oppress us. And now that power is being switched over, it's met with irrationality. That's your problem. And it's going to continue to be your problem as long as you see it as your problem. You see, our ego and our pride, we look at people and we see them coming into power and we think a few things. The people who love us and want to support us think you deserve it and I want to see what kind of change you make. The people who fear us or don't like us say, you don't deserve that power. I'm going to do what I need to stop you from gaining power and gaining access to power. And it's irrational. It's harmful, right? And then there are some people that just want to hurt innocent people because they hurt people hurt people. There's a number of different types of personalities that we have to endure in order to stop systemic oppression. And this is just the beginning. So y'all want to talk about practicing gun laws and creating new gun laws and gun control, etc. Well, that's a start, right? Is how accessible are you going to make especially semi-automatic rifles to human beings? That's one solution, is stricter gun laws. The next are stricter consequences for the people who commit crimes. For example, if a white male goes into a theater and kills a bunch of people and doesn't kill themselves, because we know mass shooters have a tendency to kill themselves. But what we started to see is a trend of that not happening, especially among white mass shooters, because the justice system sometimes works in your favor. Now we got to work in the opposite, right? We need the justice system to brutally punish these people. And I mean that. The monsters who go into communities and harm people because of their identities, that feel like because you are white or you are a dominant identity, you have the right to harm the marginalized, you are a monster. And you deserve the consequence that's coming to you through the judicial system. Now, I'm not talking about vigilante justice, but I am saying also, if one of these monsters walks into a space that you are in and your life is in danger, you should be able to defend yourself, and you should be equipped to do so, right? But I'm also saying that we need to do better at making sure the judicial system hands out consequences to white offenders like it does to black offenders. We also need to work to release a lot of especially black offenders in the criminal system, because a lot of them have been wrongfully convicted. Prisons are overcrowded. Get the wrongfully convicted, or the people that y'all put in prison for selling weed and gave them 5 years, which is absurd. Let them out of prison and make room for you to throw the white supremacist ass up in there, right? Y'all are talking about prisons are overpopulated and we need to redirect the way that we sentence people. No, we don't. You need to let the people who haven't committed heinous crimes that you have over sentenced or wrongfully sentenced out of prison, and put the people who deserve to be in there, right? That'll help with the disproportionality. But there's a lot of things that we need to do. We need to work on our policies. We need to work on righting the wrongs that institutions have created based on systemic oppression and racism. We got to work on defunding police and refunding our community. We got to learn about the distribution of resources and needs, even reparations, to help increase the average income and generational wealth for families in poverty. And let's be clear that there's a causation and correlation to families in poverty and BIPOC populations. Those are just some of the things that are on my mind. I know I rambled a little bit in this For the Culture episode, but it's a lot of shit happening. And I want to encourage people who are really struggling to take the time to take care of yourselves. Keep you safe, keep your family safe, keep your mental health and your mind safe. Find grief counselors, find therapists, have them on deck. If you work in a company or you are in a leadership position, you need to start adding these contractors and services for racialized trauma, among other forms of trauma, for your employees who need it, and even addiction services, etc., to really support people. Because we got a lot of work to do, but you got a lot of people willing to do the work, especially in our communities. You just got to trust them enough to give them the resources they need to create sustainable change. I'm Dr. C.I., and that's For the Culture. Y'all have a blessed one.